Robert Mitchum. Here's something nobody tells you about fame. You can stand in front of thousands of people, have your name on every billboard in the city, and still feel completely invisible. And the people who understood that better than anyone weren't philosophers or therapists. They were some of the biggest movie stars who ever lived. I spent a lifetime in Hollywood. Decades under bright lights, on massive sets, surrounded by some of the most extraordinary human beings this world has ever produced. And now, looking back across all those years, you know what stays with me? Not the awards, not the box office numbers, not the premieres or the reviews or the headlines. What stays with me are the people, specific faces, specific conversations, specific moments that happened quietly, away from the cameras, when nobody was watching and nobody was performing. So today, I want to take you back. I want to introduce you to 5 people who shaped my life in ways that had absolutely nothing to do with movies. Because here's the truth about Hollywood that most people never get to hear. The real stories don't happen on screen. They happen in the silence between takes, in late-night conversations that go nowhere and everywhere at the same time, in friendships that somehow outlast everything else. Now, let's start at the beginning. John Wayne. When most people hear that name, they immediately picture something. A cowboy on horseback, a soldier who never flinches, a man so tough that the word vulnerable probably never entered the same room as him. That's the version Hollywood sold to the world. And look, that version wasn't entirely wrong. He really did carry himself differently from other people. There was a gravity to him, a weight, like he'd already decided exactly who he was, and wasn't losing any sleep over it. But here's what surprised me the first time I actually spent real time around Duke. He was easy. Not in a simple way, but in a comfortable way. Like sitting down next to someone you've known your whole life, even though you just met them. In an industry where people constantly perform, even when the cameras are off, John Wayne somehow forgot to do that. Or maybe he just refused to bother. I remember one evening, long day of filming, everyone was exhausted. Most people had packed up and gone home. A small group of us stayed behind. No particular reason, just not ready to call it a night. The conversation drifted the way conversations do when nobody's trying to impress anyone. We talked about family. We talked about getting older. We talked about the strange, beautiful, ridiculous business we'd all chosen to dedicate our lives to. And Duke? He spent most of that night listening. Now, that might not sound remarkable until you realize that people spend their entire lives assuming John Wayne was the loudest man in every room he walked into. He wasn't. He knew when to talk, and he knew when to sit back and let someone else feel heard. That's a skill most people never develop, and he had it naturally. What I admired most about him was his loyalty. Hollywood isn't exactly known for deep, lasting friendships. The whole ecosystem runs on what have you done lately. Careers go up, careers come down, and the crowd around you shifts accordingly. Duke never operated that way. If he decided you were his friend, that was it. Didn't matter if your last picture bombed. Didn't matter if the studios weren't returning your calls. He showed up the same way, every single time. The movie star version of John Wayne belongs to history. But the man I knew? He belongs to a much smaller, much luckier group of people who got to see past the legend. And I count myself fortunate every time I think about it. Deborah Kerr. There are people in this world who walk into a room and somehow make it warmer without saying a single word. Deborah Kerr was one of those people. The moment she arrived somewhere, the atmosphere shifted slightly in a better direction. I'm not talking about star power or charisma or any of those big dramatic qualities people assign to famous actors. I'm talking about something quieter and far more valuable than any of that. She was kind. Genuinely, consistently, completely kind. And in Hollywood, that is rarer than any talent you could name. I worked alongside a lot of gifted people across my career. Some were extraordinary professionals, who were also absolutely exhausting to be around. Some had enormous reputations, and enormous egos to match. Deborah was different. She was one of the most respected actresses of her entire generation, and she walked around like she had no idea the world had decided she was remarkable. Not because she was unaware, but because it simply didn't change how she treated people. I watched her on set many times. Didn't matter if she was speaking to a director or to the person responsible for making sure her coffee was warm. Same attention, same respect, same genuine interest in whoever was standing in front of her. Those things matter more than most people realize. A film set under pressure can become a pressure cooker very quickly. One person with genuine warmth can completely change the temperature of an entire day. Between takes, we'd talk. Not about movies, not about the industry, just about life. Books she'd been reading, places she wanted to travel, thoughts about family and time, and the way years seem to move faster the older you get. Those conversations never felt like small talk. They felt real, because she was real. Completely, consistently, refreshingly real. The thing about Deborah that I think about most is this. So many people in this business spend years carefully constructing a version of themselves for public consumption. Deborah never bothered with any of that. The person you met on your first day was the same person you'd find yourself talking to 5 years later. That kind of consistency is a gift, both to the person who has it and to everyone fortunate enough to be around them. Talent fades, careers end. But genuine kindness? That's the thing people carry with them long after everything else is gone. Humphrey Bogart. Before I knew the man, I knew the myth. Everybody did. You couldn't grow up around cinema without knowing exactly who Humphrey Bogart was. That face, that voice, that completely unique way he had of making you believe he'd already survived things that would flatten anyone else. On screen, he was untouchable. The kind of presence that made everything else around him seem slightly smaller. So naturally, when I finally got to spend real time with him, I expected a certain kind of person. What I found was something far more interesting. Bogey was honest. Brutally, refreshingly, sometimes uncomfortably honest. In a town built on performance and presentation, and carefully managed impressions, he walked around completely uninterested in any of that. He didn't construct things. He didn't manage his image in conversation. He said what he thought, sometimes with very few words, and then he waited to see how you handled it. I remember being in a room with him where everyone else was working very hard to impress someone important. Bogey wasn't. He sat back, watched it all with those sharp eyes of his, and then said something so direct and so perfectly accurate that the entire room went quiet for a moment. Not because he was trying to dominate anything. He simply didn't believe in wasting energy on pretending. Now, here's the part that surprises people. Beneath all of that, there was real generosity. The public got the tough guy, the hard-edged detective, the man who looked like he'd never needed anything from anyone. The people who actually knew him got someone who cared deeply about his friends. Real loyalty. Real warmth, even if it came wrapped in something rougher than most people were used to. One conversation has stayed with me for decades. We were talking late in the evening, just the two of us, about the business and how quickly everything changes in it. He looked around the room and said something simple. He said that fame comes and goes, but people always remember how you made them feel. No big speech, no dramatic delivery, just a quiet observation from a man who'd seen enough of the world to know exactly what lasted and what didn't. I've thought about those words more times than I can count, and every time, I think Bogey was exactly right. Marilyn Monroe. A lot of people will raise an eyebrow at this one. They think they already know everything about Marilyn Monroe. The photographs, the headlines, the white dress, the red lips, the voice. The world has decided who she was, and locked that image firmly in place. What I want to tell you today is that the woman I actually knew was someone the world never quite got to meet. She was funny, not in a rehearsed, movie star way. Actually, genuinely funny. The kind of funny that catches you off guard, because you're not expecting it, and then you can't stop laughing, because the timing was so perfect. She had that gift. But there was something else running alongside it. Something quieter and heavier that was always present just beneath the surface. There was a sadness in Marilyn that never fully went away. She could be laughing harder than anyone else in the room, and then, 2 minutes later, she'd go completely quiet, looking at something far away that no one else could see. I noticed it the first time, and kept noticing it every time after that. What struck me most about her was how desperately she wanted people to understand her, not to admire her, not to worship the image, She wanted to be known. There's a huge difference between those things, and Hollywood, which loved the product it had created, never quite figured out how to handle the actual human being underneath all of it. I think that hurt her in ways she couldn't always articulate. One afternoon stands out above everything else. We were talking, just talking, about life, and how it felt to be seen by millions of people without ever truly being known. And she asked a question that sounded almost childlike in its simplicity. She asked whether people would still care about her if she weren't famous. I remember feeling the weight of that question immediately, because the answer, for someone in her position, wasn't as obvious as it should have been. Fame can surround you with an ocean of attention and still leave you feeling profoundly alone. Marilyn understood that better than almost anyone. The woman I loved wasn't the icon. The world already had that version. The Marilyn I carry with me was thoughtful, vulnerable, unexpectedly wise, and genuinely good-hearted. She deserved more understanding than she got. And all these years later, when I think about her, it isn't the photographs that come to mind. It's the real woman. The one who wanted nothing more than to be seen clearly by someone who actually looked. Jane Russell. Every once in a while, across an entire lifetime, you meet someone who simply fits. Not dramatically, not in a way you can easily explain. They just slot into your life like they were always supposed to be there, and the friendship that follows feels less like something you built and more like something you discovered. Jane Russell was that person for me. The first thing I'll tell you about Jane isn't what most people would lead with. It wasn't her looks, though that was certainly the first thing the world noticed. It was her laugh. You could hear it from across a crowded room, and when you heard it, you wanted to be wherever it was coming from. Warm, real, completely uncontained. The kind of laugh that tells you everything you need to know about a person before they've said a single word. What I loved most about Jane was her total lack of pretense. She knew exactly who she was completely comfortable with it, and she had zero interest in performing for anyone. In a business where people constantly recalibrate themselves depending on who's in the room, Jane stayed the same person all the time. That's not as common as it should be. In fact, it's remarkably rare. We spent years having conversations that ranged from important to completely meaningless, and I loved every single one of them. The serious talks, the silly ones, the late evenings that somehow lasted longer than anyone planned. Looking back, those ordinary moments are the ones I treasure most. Because life, real life, isn't made up of grand dramatic scenes. It's made up of afternoons, and phone calls, and inside jokes, and small, specific memories that lodge themselves somewhere permanent. Jane had a genuine talent for making people feel valued. When she talked to you, she was actually talking to you. She wasn't scanning the room for someone more important. She wasn't waiting for her turn to speak. She listened. And when she responded, you felt it. You felt like what you'd said actually mattered. That's a quality I've looked for in people my entire life, and found far less often than I'd have liked. Years would pass between our meetings sometimes. Then we'd find each other again, and pick up exactly where we'd left off. No awkward catching up, no rebuilding required. Just two people who knew each other well enough that time couldn't really touch what they had. That's the mark of a true friendship. It doesn't require maintenance, it simply survives. Now I want to leave you with something. I've had what most people would call an extraordinary life. I've traveled to places I couldn't have imagined as a young man. I've worked alongside people who will be remembered long after any of us are gone. I've experienced things that would fill several lifetimes. And if you ask me, right now, honestly, what I value most out of all of it, my answer would come quickly. The people. Not the awards sitting on a shelf somewhere. Not the reviews I memorized when I was young and insecure. Not the box office numbers, or the critical acclaim, or any of the things that feel so urgent when you're in the middle of chasing them. The people. John Wayne and his quiet loyalty. Deborah Kerr and her effortless grace. Humphrey Bogart and his blunt, beautiful honesty. Marilyn Monroe and her searching, tender heart. Jane Russell and that laugh that could light up any room it entered. Every life is defined by the people who share it with you. Some walk through briefly and leave small marks. Others walk in and never really leave, even after they're gone. The lucky ones, and I count myself among the lucky, find a handful of people who change the shape of their entire story. Long after the cameras stop rolling, and the lights go dark for the last time, those are the faces you see when you close your eyes. Those are the voices you still hear. Those are the ones worth holding on to with everything you have, for as long as you possibly can. So here's what I want to ask you before you go. Think about the people in your life right now. The ones who make rooms warmer just by walking in. The ones who listen when they could easily talk. The ones who show up the same way every time, regardless of what's changed around them. When did you last tell them what they mean to you? Don't wait as long as I did to understand what actually matters. The films will always be there. The memories, the real ones, only last as long as you hold on to them. If this reminded you of someone special, pass it on to them. And if you want more stories like this one, stick around. There are plenty more where this came from.